Welcome to the Facing Your Fears podcast, where we talk about facing the fears we encounter in education as teachers, students, administrators, and parents while finding our inner confidence to thrive. I'm your host, Amanda Alford, and today my guest for the Season 1 finale of Facing Your Fears is Mr. Rod Hite. Rod is originally from Vevey, Indiana. He is currently the superintendent for the Switzerland County School Corporation. Rod is a former social studies teacher, junior high principal, high school principal, athletic director, and superintendent. Rod, thank you for agreeing and making time to come on to my podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I know summer for teachers is a little bit more laid back, but for the administrator, it's still right on trucking, like the train's still going down the track. So I appreciate it. As always, I like to start off with what I call the whiteboard message. If you are unfamiliar with whiteboard messages, you can follow Brittany Root on Instagram. She is a 5th grade teacher from Illinois, and that is where I got the suggestion from. She would write these questions up on the board on her whiteboard, and it's a way of getting the students involved and interactive. And I've taken a course in that, and it's just asking a daily question like, what is your favorite TV show? What is your favorite quote? What does this quote mean to you? And so I always like to start off kind of whiteboard messages, because I found that teachers are just as excited about answering the whiteboard messages when I wrote them up on the board. And then I have teacher suggestions. Like I'm always like, I had my principal say, we need to have superhero day. Who's your favorite superhero? Because that's something that he likes. And the kids loved it. My students were all like, yeah, superheroes. Like they loved that. We did, if you could be any character in a book. And for middle schoolers, I wasn't sure, and they loved that. They came up with a variety of book characters, and a lot of them were ones that they had read that year in language arts.
Good.
So my first one is, as a former social studies teacher, if you could go back in time to any time period, where would you go?
Good question. I will say, as a social studies teacher, probably different than as on a personal level. I would go back to the 1980s. And the only reason I say the 1980s is because most of my closest family members who have passed away would be in the 1980s at one time, and I go back and visit with family. That's on a personal level. As a history teacher, there's so many large events that took place throughout history, I probably couldn't name just one spot I would want to go to.
Well, I talked to Matt Miller. I interviewed him a couple of episodes ago, and I asked him kind of a similar question. And I said it's kind of depending on the day. You know, that day just happened to be Good Friday. And so we talked about biblical times. You know, if you could go back to a biblical time, and he's a history fanatic as well. You know, today we are honoring D-Day for World War II. So to be able to go back during the 40s and see what our country went through. But my answer usually when I write it up on the board is the early 1920s, the Industrial Revolution. You know, things are really starting to take off, buildings, and things like that. But I tell the kids, honestly, I really just want to see Babe Ruth play baseball. Like, I just want to go back to New York and, like, experience the atmosphere of when Babe Ruth went to the plate and what Yankee Stadium was like. And
I think that would be great. Or 1961, when you get to watch Roger Maris battle it out for the home run title to beat Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
I think that would have, because you got Mickey Mantle in the hunt, and so, you know, New York's right there. But yeah, as a baseball fan, I got to admit, you know, to see Babe Ruth play one time would be phenomenal.
My second question, as I was telling you just a little bit ago, this is one that I'm definitely asking my students next year, because we had gone into this argument before where I would tell my students, hey, I got Cracker Barrel biscuits. And they're like, what? You didn't bring us any? Like, it was a big thing. But my daughter, we introduced Red Lobster to her, and she was between. So my question is, if you had to choose between Cracker Barrel biscuits or Red Lobster cheddar biscuits?
I would go with Red Lobster cheddar biscuits. One, you can't go wrong with garlic butter and cheddar on a biscuit, right? And but they're almost two different classes, because you wouldn't put jelly on those biscuits where you would with the.
True.
So you kind of have two different categories there. But yeah, I would probably lean that direction.
I think that's what my daughter's going for right now too, because I think that's her new favorite. Because now when we go past the Red Lobster, she's like, stop, like there they are, stop right there. And my husband joked, he's like, I would have Cracker Barrel for breakfast and Red Lobster for lunch, and then I wouldn't have to choose. Like I could just have both. And I'm like, that's a good point, because I love just the bread. We go to Olive Garden, I just want the breadsticks and the salad. Like I could care less if I get pasta. We go to Texas Roadhouse, and you get those biscuits. Like it's really just the biscuits. Like that could be a whole meal in and of itself. So switching gears, like I said, when I was introducing you, you've kind of gone through a host of different positions. You really have experience in all levels, even elementary. Your wife is an elementary teacher,
Yep.
so you have experience K through 12 of our school system. Take us down the road of kind of your journey in education and your why, because I know we've talked before, yours is a different journey. You kind of carved your own path. So kind of take us down that journey of why you switched from private sector to the education.
Well, my journey started out a little different than most. I was the first person in my direct family to graduate from high school. And so that in itself was a pretty big accomplishment for me. I loved athletics. I loved everything else about school. But at the same time, I was an at-risk kid. And so for me, I didn't think college was an option. At the time, I didn't talk to my counselors much about going to college. I didn't understand the funding formulas. I didn't know about student loans and even Pell Grants and things of that nature I would have qualified for. So I took it upon myself to figure out what I wanted to do. I was into cars. I went to work at Clifty Chevrolet, which is now Chandler Chevrolet. And one day at lunch, I said, I want more out of life. I got to do more. My wife was headed off to college herself. And I went down and I enlisted in the Marine Corps. My cousin and I were going in together. He backed out and I went. And as I got in the Marine Corps, I understood the value of self-discipline. I understood the value of hard work ethic. Coming from a country community, I will tell you, it instantly paid off as I got into the Marine Corps. I excelled in the Marine Corps, had a great career. Got done at, my little over 4 years in, and it was time to decide if I was going to re-enlist or not. And I decided it was time for me to step out. I had an offer for a civilian job to go into the banking industry. When I went into the banking industry, the main reason I stepped away from the military to go into it, into the private sector, it was a tremendous amount of money that I was going to make in the banking industry compared to anything I'd ever experienced in my life. Growing up in a family where, I had a waitress as the main income in the family, this was the first big opportunity I had. So I took that opportunity. The military had me traveling and deploying quite often. I turn around and I get into the business world, and I was flying out of Chicago and, headed back down to Indiana and then back up to Michigan, and they would hop me around spot to spot. And so the travel business was great in the beginning, but it becomes a lonely lifestyle living out of hotels when you're married. We didn't have kids. We didn't have anything else. My wife and I had a lot of money, but not a lot of time. And so as we were traveling together one time on a vacation, we had this conversation, and she was raised by school teachers. And her mom and dad are both retired teachers. And she talked about how great the family trips were, Christmas breaks, summer breaks, all the different things they had growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s. As we made a family decision to want to have children, we just said, let's go back to college. And we literally were in Hawaii filling out college applications to go back to school. And when I came back, my boss and everybody else, they called me up to Chicago. They said, there's no way you're leaving this business to go become a teacher. Do you know what teachers make and all this kind of stuff? And as we had that conversation, it came home to me that I knew what I was giving up because I knew what I wanted. And what I really wanted was family, and I wanted to come home. We go back to college together. We'd made enough money in the GI Bill combined that we were able to put ourselves through our undergrads. We get done. I had to wrap up in 3 years because the GI Bill's 36 months. I took a lot of college courses at once. I was, fairly successful in college. Get done. We get our first teaching jobs. We relocate to the area, living in Versailles. My wife got her first teaching job in Jennings County. I got my first teaching job at North Decatur, and I became a social studies teacher. I taught junior high social studies and high school senior econ and AP US history for juniors. So at that point, I was coaching football, basketball, and baseball at various levels, and staying busy with it and enjoying every moment of it. Had an opportunity to go back to South Ripley where my wife had graduated and become a social studies teacher there and coach one sport, and we were having our first son. And, she's pregnant, young baby on the way, first baby, more time at home. So I moved from North Decatur to go to South Ripley. My son's born to the point he's waddling around by baseball season. My wife gets hired on at South Ripley. We come in together as a team, and things were going really well. At the end of the first year, my former high school principal, Gary Cook from North Decatur, calls me up and says, hey, Rod, have you thought about going into administration? And I said, well, I got my master's in curriculum. I'm getting ready to wrap up. I didn't get it in administration. He said, well, we think with your background of coaching all the different sports and how well you got along here at North Decatur, you'd be a perfect fit for our athletic director, assistant principal role at the junior senior high school. They still are a 7 through 12 building. So talk to my wife, think on it, pray on it. We make a family decision, and I make the switch to go into administration. And so that led me back to North Decatur while Mandy stayed at South Ripley. There for 2 years. I was the athletic director, assistant principal. South Ripley was a 7 through 12 building, went through a building project and built their first junior high school. So when it opened up, Gary came to me. Mandy was having our second baby. He said, you need more time. You need to be at home. This job takes you away from home quite a bit when you're athletic director, a lot of late evenings, Saturday events, those kind of things. So I applied for the middle school principal job or the junior high principal job and got moved back to South Ripley, became their first junior high principal. Did that for a number of years. While doing that, I went ahead and got my superintendent's license. And that's my EDS degree. Once I got my EDS degree, I then had the opportunity to go to a small school, which a lot of people don't realize, to be a superintendent. I turned it down for a large middle school job. And I went to Edgewood, which is Richland Bean Blossom School District, just outside of Bloomington in Ellettsville, Indiana. Became the junior high principal there, and it's grades 6, 7, and 8. About 680 kids to start out with, and then raised it up from there for a few students. We end up, after 2 years, we go from a D to an A. Once we go from a D to an A and do a big school turnaround, we did the same thing at South Ripley prior to. They asked me to become the curriculum director for the district. So I became the assistant superintendent in charge of transportation and curriculum. Thought it was a great stepping stone. From that point, we had bought a second farm here in Switzerland County, kind of combined it with my first farm that I had at home. And when I combined those two farms, my wife said, look, we're getting too many mortgages going. We've got an apartment in Bloomington. We've got a house in Versailles. We got now 2 farms in Switzerland County. We got to make a choice. And so South Ripley's high school principal job came open. I came back to South Ripley, became the high school principal. She got a teaching job back at South Ripley. Thought we were settled in. I told the board when I was hired, I said, you guys are probably wondering, now that you've hired me a couple times over, how long am I going to be here? And I told them there's only one place I'm really going to leave you for, and that's Switzerland County. And at that point, I thought Mr. Jones was going to be in the seat at least 3 to 4 more years. They knew that, and unknown to me, that it opened up quicker than I thought. And, what a lot of people don't realize is I actually applied for 2 other jobs at Switzerland County and never got an interview for teaching jobs because my ultimate goal, there's even a newspaper article when I was principal of the year, was to move back to Switzerland County. And I tried hard to get here. So when that didn't work out, those doors closed for a reason. It just wasn't the right time. And, God gave me the opportunity last year, and I've been fortunate enough to come back, and that's why I'm home.
And something that you hit on that a lot of my guests have said, when I talk to Mark Boggs, when I talk to Katie Collier, when I talk to Ryan Jessup, and it's all about coming home. It's all about being able, I went to school with Mark, I went to school with Katie. Katie Temple, even though she didn't go to the school corporation, her mom was my second grade teacher. She's grown up in the school corporation in the small town, and it's all about being able to give back to your community.
Exactly.
To stand, I've told this story before, to stand in my classroom on the first day and tell my students, I know a lot of your parents, and I can tell you stories, and I already have that connection because I already have that relationship, and to be like, I know what it's like to grow up here too, and to tell them stories about, how the Y wasn't here when we were growing up, right. And that the wine festival, our little town festival, when we were kids, it was in Main Street. It was up on
Courthouse Square?
Yeah, on the 4-way, and I was like, the stage was right there under the lights, but it wasn't a stoplight, guys. It was a flashing light, and just for them to make those connections, because I have the ability, I was like, guys, I went to this school. I had several of the same teachers, and to know that, I've told this story before, and I told it yesterday when I was at a conference. My daughter just went through first grade, and she was in the exact same first grade classroom that I went through, that my husband was in, and to be able to tell her that, your cousins went through here, mommy went through here, daddy, your aunts, your uncles, we all went through this corporation. And to know that, you're the next generation, you're the next one coming through. Not many kids get to do that. Most kids, when they go through the school corporation, because of a job or whatever, their kid has to move, the parents have to move. So to be able to connect and look back through the photos that are up on the wall in the high school and to be like, I remember that game. I remember when Bernie Burke was the basketball coach, and to have those memories, because that's a connection with the students that you can't make in other corporations.
And I guess I'll go back to the first question when you said, if you could go back to any part in time, it was the 1980s because of all my family that was here. My dad had 15 brothers and sisters, and they grew up down on Grants Creek, which is now Hite Road. And when you get to that point where you're rooted in a community in Switzerland County, you can look back in the programs year after year after year, and you see the same last names. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people think progress is a great thing, and I agree in a lot of different ways. But so is tradition, family, and community. And our families have known each other for so long in this community that even if you don't know the person, you know their family, and you can make that instant connection. And it's the same way with over the years. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people helping people in this community just because of family connections, maybe not direct connections with them. And that's a big reason of why I want to come back. I always say I want the school to be the hub of the community because we're all Switzerland County Pacers. I love nothing more than the fact that if you go to East Enterprise at Switzerland County Elementary School or you go to Jeff Craig, you're a Pacer. It used to be when I was in school, 7 through 12 building, middle school wasn't here yet, but if you go to junior high or middle school here now, you're a Pacer. You go to high school, you're a Pacer. And I think a lot of that is really deeply rooted in our community. And it's always fun to me when I go to the festival, even when I go anywhere out in town, when you see all the orange and all the blue, you're wearing orange, I'm wearing blue. It's one of those things where no matter where you are, no matter if it's summertime or not, you pick out the orange and blue pretty quick. Mm-hmm. When I first got into education, something that really jumped out at me, I was on a trip with another school, and we went to Silver Creek. Well, growing up, we never played Silver Creek in anything. No. And social media wasn't out, so you didn't see all the different pictures posted everywhere. I saw the SC and I saw blue and orange when I walked into that gym. And I was like, what? This isn't right. They're not allowed to have an orange SC. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And it actually ticked me off because I was like, wait, that's where I grew up. That's not, you can't use these colors. You can't use that logo, right? And so it's funny how that works out because it becomes part of you. You're not just a school number. You are a Pacer. And our community, I think, has really come together that way. Most of my family, they were in Patriot. A lot of my other family members were here in VV. And so I remember when I was young and we called East Enterprise the new school. You still know, coming back, I still in meetings every now and then. I'm like, well, if you're out the new school or if you're at Jeff Craig, still hits me that way. But I remember the conversations over consolidation and when VV High School merged with Patriot and they came up with Switzerland County. And those type of conversations were pretty heated, and you don't hear near as many now. Now everybody's just a Pacer. And we've finally gotten to that point. Your kids get to see that. My kids will get to see that. I think that's great.
But, like you were just saying, we're K through 12. Mm-hmm. K through 12 Pacers. And talking about a lot of our kids, like you were just saying, it is generational. Last summer, Memorial Day, we went to the cemeteries, we visited, and we took our daughter to New Liberty, which is out at East Enterprise right there by the school, and we visited my dad. And right next to my dad is my grandparents and my aunts and my uncles. And my daughter notices, she goes, hey, that one says Alford, our last name. And my husband and I kind of started looking because it was my husband's great aunt, his grandpa's siblings. And we started looking and we started going through because we had never recognized, and we're like, both of our families are in this cemetery. Like, our families grew up with each other. And we started trying to explain this to our daughter, and our daughter, she has special needs and she's young, and she says what any typical kid would say. She's like, am I related to everybody in here? Yeah. And we're like, a lot of them, yeah. And we're like, how many kids can we take and say, your family grew up together. You are the 5th generation of the family farm. And she is. And, we were going back and we took her to my husband's family farm, and we're like, you are the 5th generation to be on this farm. And just to have that, to have that community, to have that connection, like you said, roots and tradition, because it is important. And it's a dying act. And so just to be able to give that to our children, and a lot of our kids have that. Their great-grandparents went here. They're like, my grandma was a warrior. My great-grandpa went to Patriot. And I'm like, yeah, so did my dad. You know, and we still have those yearbooks. I still have
Yeah.
a Patriot Trojans yearbook and a VV Warriors. And we have that picture of the class of 69, the first Pacers, up on the board. And my mom is in that picture. But if you go through, several of our community members are in that picture. Like,
Oh, yeah. You
we're
still
here.
see them every day, right?
Yeah, we're here, and they still support it. We have, you know, I go out to the track because I'm the track coach. And we have people who, back in 75, when track first started at this school, they still come out and help in our track meets because they're dedicated to the corporation, to the school, and they're like, we want to still see this thrive. You know, we helped start it. We want to see these kids help continue and thrive through it, and I love that.
Well, I will tell you, serving my country gave me a whole new meaning to service. And I believe that, you know, when I was growing up in this community, my neighbors, my friends, their parents, you know, most all of them were veterans, you know, those kind of things, and Vietnam era veterans and World War II era veterans, and my family members, my uncles. And so as I come through now, I look back and I think what great character messages those gentlemen gave to me as a young man. And really giving back to my community now is the best way I can serve the lessons they taught me. And, you know, for me, you hear me talk a lot in meetings about the 3 E's. And I think that really is because of the path of my life. I want kids to be able to leave here and become gainfully employed because I left here and got a job. I want kids to be able to leave here and be ready to be enlisted in the military because I enlisted in the military. I want kids to leave here and be ready to enroll in college because eventually I was enrolled and went to college. And so those 3 things in my life set me on a path to get here to prepare these other kids to be ready for those stages in their life and whichever one they best choose for themselves.
And I actually used that yesterday in a conference in a presentation. I said, my superintendent is really strong about the 3 E's. And I went and I explained what the 3 E's are and how important it is for us as educators to get our students ready to choose one of the 3 E's. So I actually have used that now in presentations because that is what we're doing. I mean, we are trying to get them, whichever 3 it is, what skills can we give the students to prepare them for the career path that they choose. So what would you say, kind of switching gears, what would you say is some of the most common fears in education that you have seen? Like I said, you've gone from the classroom, administrator, now superintendent, different school corporations. What are some common fears that you have seen either as a teacher, administrator, what you've seen as a superintendent, or even as a parent?
Well, I can tell you that for me right now, one of the largest issues facing education are funding changes. It's not so much in the dollars, but how they're distributed by state legislature. You know, a lot of people will say, well, the superintendent should do this, or the state school board should do this. And when I say superintendent, I mean the Indiana Department of Education superintendent. I just saw this on Twitter the other day. They don't have that ability any longer. It's all legislative. And so through our legislative leaders, there's been some changes to the funding formulas. There's been changes to, we used to call it the GOSTER, which is the change in your student population and how it's paid out. There's changes to property tax caps. There's all these different changes that the funding's still there, but it's being redistributed in different amounts. And what used to be is no longer the same. And so you see a lot of schools that are struggling sometimes to keep their facilities maintained. You see a lot of schools who are struggling to keep their buildings staffed. And just like you grew up here as a pacer and now you're a teacher, I walked in our hallways and I'm very proud of the number of people who've come home to teach in this corporation. One of my biggest fears as superintendent is making sure that our enrollment is steady, that we never have to cut our teaching staff so that we can offer the right courses to prepare those kids for one of those 3 E's. A little further, and it's different lanes for me as a superintendent. You know, the Indiana Youth Institute presented to us as a community this year, and they said that one of the things in Switzerland County that we're number 1 in, and it's not a positive, is we are number 1 in the state out of 92 counties as food insecure student homes. And so with that being the case, that really kind of hit home with me. And so we're working hard, and I've got some fantastic people in this district. You know, Fred Ross has worked really hard on getting a food bank grant, and we're very close to making that happen. Gayla Bullock has done a fantastic job at the cafeteria and really monitored some numbers for us. And she has written a grant, and we were just approved this week. It's getting ready to roll out. You're the very first person it's going public with, that we were approved for this CEP program. And that's a community eligibility program where we are going to be able to provide 100% free breakfast and free lunch. And that's at least 4 years. We still need people to sign up for it. But those kids will be guaranteed a free meal for breakfast and lunch and at least get 2 good quality meals every day. And in the summer, she also provides that same program starting June 10th, running through July. So those are 2 different areas. I now see taxation issues coming up. There's going to be potentially some issues here with the lawsuit with Belterra. It's been ongoing for a few years. We really don't know where that's headed. That could be an issue for our county, and then you look outside of that, you look at enrollment numbers every year as you come in, and just to keep the funding straight there. Curriculum-wise, I think we're headed in a really good direction as a district. Those are fears on the superintendent level. Safety-wise, we've made some good changes this year. We're still pursuing changes every day when it comes to education. You can never make a school safe enough because it's your most precious resource. But at the same time, schools are always going to be vulnerable because we're open to the public and the community. And so that's always a big fear that weighs on a superintendent. Student safety always comes first. The busing and transportation, on those weathery roads and those, never thought I would have to call a school day before January, and here we are in November before Thanksgiving. I called my first snow day when the ice storm hit. But we always try to take student safety into account when it comes to those kind of things. And so those are fears for a superintendent. As a building principal, it's always calling the events, making sure the events are well organized, making sure everybody's where they need to be, when they need to be, handling discipline issues as an assistant principal. As an athletic director, I'm sure Mark talked to you about making sure your officials are there, making sure your checks are cut, all those kind of things. I've held all those roles, so I know that. And as a teacher, a lot of times you look to your leadership to put you in circumstances where you can be successful in the classroom and you don't have the ancillary or the outside worries. You're able to focus on kids and learning. And so my job as superintendent is to help build a leadership team that can help teachers focus on kids. Because when you have issues in a district and your teachers and your community starts talking about those issues, they focus on the issue more than they focus on the kids. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I've always said that teachers work for students. I work for teachers. It's when they stop working for students, they start working for me. And, that's when it gets uncomfortable. And so I really believe if we keep the students first in all the decisions we make, it works itself out.
And last question, what advice can you share to administrators since you have, gone from the classroom to an administrator, even from an assistant principal to a principal, from athletic director to a principal, or even assistant superintendent, and then the jump up to superintendent? What advice can you share with those who are kind of worried about taking the jump? Because this is the season. June is the season. If you're going to make the jump, this is when to do it.
I will tell you the biggest advice that I could give any budding administrator is make sure you're ready. And the reason I say that is I got into this because I wanted to start a family and I love kids and I want to be around kids. The higher you go, the less you interact with kids and you start interacting with adults. And whether you're an assistant principal or even a principal, a lot of that time spent with teachers or with parents and not students. So if you are going to make that leap, make sure that you build time in your schedule every day at every opportunity to get out and be among kids. I try to visit the buildings, each building at least 3 times a week, if not daily. And I love to time it with a passing period so I can get to see the kids. It's really about interacting with kids that'll keep you young in this business.
When I think the students like seeing you, because when you walk through, they're like, Mr. Hite's here. Like they like seeing that you are taking part and interest in them. You're not just sitting in the administration office, making big decisions. Like you're out and amongst them. Like they like talking about or they like talking about seeing you. They like seeing you in the hallway. They're like, I got to talk to Mr. Hite. Like he said Hite. Just things like that because you're making that connection.
What they don't realize is that's probably the best part of my day. So, not only do they get excited about seeing me, that's really when I get excited, when I get to talk to the kids.
Well, and during when the conservation officers were in, and I got to share the story, of hunting with you, like they thought that was so cool. Like that was the greatest story was because one, it happened here at home, so they knew where the farm is, but it was relatable. Like they knew who I was talking about, and they just thought that was so neat because again, there's that connection that they have, even though you're the superintendent, like they still have that connection and they like that. Like they like to be able to see. And it's the same with, Mr. McGarvey, if he tells a story, or I'm sure Mr. Todd or Mr. Boggs, when they can interact with the students on that level, they like that because they know that, you're being personable. They're making those connections. They're building that relationship. And it's the same as being out in the community. One of the coolest things I have is when we go out somewhere, Walmart, out to eat, when you hear your name shouted across the building and you realize one of your students has seen you and they're all like, hey, and they're excited to see you. They're excited to see you out in the community. And my husband always jokes, he's like, we can't go anywhere. Like, we can't go anywhere because IGA, one of the restaurants, Walmart, if we even leave the county, he's like, people recognize you and your students see you. They yell your name, Albert, across the building. And I'm like, but that's cool.
That is. There's nothing better than having a mini paparazzi, I guess, when you're out in public, that the kids get to see you and they know you and they feel comfortable reaching out to you. There are some teachers that I know go through an entire career and they leave here and they're ready to retire when they're ready to retire. But most teachers, when they leave here, they miss their colleagues, but they definitely miss the kids. And, never let that grow old to you because that's the most exciting time in the world when you get to see those kids.
Well, like I said, there's nothing more exciting than, Wine Festival, walking through and you have all these kids running up and saying hi to you and trying, wanting a high five. And they're all like, that's my teacher.
Yeah.
Like, that's exciting, because you're like, we've only been in school 3 weeks. And I've already got kids running up, like, excited and yelling from the rise. And they're all like, hey, and they want my attention. Like, they're not, covering their eyes going, oh, there she is. Like, don't let her see us. Like, that is an exciting thing.
I will tell you, that's a transition when you go to high school. The biggest thing I've noticed is at the elementary school, the lower elementary school, there are a lot of huggers, which is great. It's a great thing. A lot of huggers. You get into the upper elementary school, you get into kind of those cool kids, but they start yelling your name. Middle school, they're very excitable. They're ready to go, high fives, ready to make it happen. You get into high school, the freshmen can be that way, but by the time you get to seniors, you're just hoping they look back at you twice to say, hey, come here for a minute, I need to talk to you. That kind of thing.
Well, I was like, then I'm glad I'm where I am because I do like that. And my husband jokes, and he knows that I like it. He always jokes with me. He's like, I feel like I'm walking around campaigning when I'm with you sometimes, especially when, like, during the fair week or during Wine Festival. He goes, because all the kids stop and talk to you. And I'm like, but that's so neat.
Oh, nothing I like more. When you go to the 4-H fair and you get all these kids that are showing animals, and it's just about that time again, and you walk up and you ask them to tell you about their animal. And it may be something that you already know or whatever else. But at the same time, when you get to see them get excited about it, and now they're teaching their teacher something, I love it when I have kids explaining to me everything from their rabbits to their hogs, whatever's going on, but they're letting me know how it goes, when they compete, how they do, and then they catch me later and they start telling me, Mr. Hite, I got a blue ribbon. Mr. Hite, I won a showmanship award, all those kind of things. That's just fantastic.
Well, and it's exciting when they tell you, they're like, I'm going to show at this time. Are you going to come watch me show?
Yeah, you can come. Yep.
And I make a point, like I'm very busy during the fair week, but I make a point to go to every single show and see my students and to make sure that they see that I'm there. Like, I want them to know, yes, I was there. So even if it's a wave, even if it's an afterwards good job or before good luck, like, I make a point to see every one of my students that I've had past, present, coming up and say, hey, I was here. I made the point to come. And I even do that at games. I'll come to a soccer game or I'll go to a baseball game or a basketball game. And I make it a point for them to know, hey, I did come see you. Like, I took the time because I wanted to. I wanted to see you be successful in something.
I tell you, you're exactly right. And I don't know if you've been able to catch a band concert or the choir kids this year. They are doing a phenomenal job as well. But I guess maybe being a coach and athletic director, it falls right in my wheelhouse. I'm probably that superintendent that people are like, oh my gosh, here he comes again. I go to all those events, and what they don't realize is it's not so much I'm there to interact with all the other adults. I see all those administrators every day. I really love to see the kids in a different light, and they do such a phenomenal job out there every day representing Switzerland County.
Well, and like we said, they love it. They love to see that we're interested in them more than just what they can do in the classroom. Like, we're actually genuinely interested in them. We're invested in them, and we want them to know that we want to be a part of them.
And their success will only grow from there. When they see the success on or off the field, on or off the stage, in or out of the classroom, it only grows from there. It perpetuates to the rest of their life.
Well, thank you, Rod, for joining me today, and thank you all for listening to the Facing Your Fears podcast. If you like my show and want to know more, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Alford_Science. You can find all of my podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube. Please leave me a review and make sure to subscribe. Join me in August when the season 2 of Facing Your Fears podcast will premiere. And as the great Red Green used to say, I'm pulling for you. We're all in this together. Have a great day.